Welcome to the B.rad podcast. It's Brad Kearns. These are our sponsors. Male optimization formula with organs. B.rad's macadamia masterpiece. Perfect keto ketone supplements. Carol Fit stationary bike. Organifi superfood. Viore clothing. And Let's Get Check.com home testing. And please visit the bradkearns.com shop page for my personal selection of favorite products for health, fitness, and peak performance with great discount offers. And now here we go with the show, mofo.
I think it's important that we get help where we can and that we're not ashamed to admit when we need help. I don't care how old you are. If you were in your 50s or if you were in your teens, grief is grief. A broken heart is a broken heart. The combined physical and spiritual freedom combined together. That's what I think is very interesting about it. It's a convergence. So yes, it's meditative, but it's kind of induced by a physical experience.
Hey listeners, I hope you enjoyed the full-length interview show with Shawn Askinosie, proprietor of Askinosie Chocolate. And after we finished the formal show, we kept talking, and this guy loves to go deep and get spiritual on ourselves, and it's really fun. So I think you're going to dig this breather show where he talks about kind of accessing that spiritual experience of the incredible sense of freedom that's fleeting in everyday life, but sometimes it's accessed through physical exercise. And I share some of my insights about some of the great memories I have, especially the day that I quit my miserable job, got on my bike and pedaled 103 miles without any training, and my quad saw God during the ride. And I also had just this confluence of special moments in my life of leaving my career and embarking on a new path. So just a fun little chat and more insights from Shawn Askinosie. I think you're going to enjoy it. Going back to that mention of getting your mind, your body, and your spirit right. Yeah. And here we are. We're in that advanced age group. I think in the 50 plus division, and we got to start looking at that even further than we did a decade or 2 decades ago. But how's your fitness approach? And we were going to talk about some of that.
Yeah, it's good. I'm in the midst of a push-up challenge now that is really hard for me. And it's but what I was going to ask you about that I think you would really be uniquely suited to help me with is about middle way through the pandemic, I needed to engage the services of a therapist/teacher, something beyond my spiritual director. And I'm not ashamed to say, I was in a pretty tough spot. And many of us experience, if not dark nights of the soul, maybe gray nights or shaded nights of the soul. And I think it's important that we get help where we can and that we're not ashamed to admit when we need help. And this woman that's been helping me, this has just been by telephone weekly. She's been awesome. And last week in our session, and it wasn't necessarily from any prompting from her. If it was very subtle, but for whatever reason, I evoked in my mind the first moment in my life where I had a knowing of freedom. And I don't mean where I believed in my freedom or had a book knowledge of my freedom or someone told me that I had freedom, but an experiential knowing of freedom. And as I was talking with her, it came to me that when that was, I was in the 3rd or 4th grade, probably the 3rd grade. And so I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. And I rode my bike to school by myself for the first time. And so this would have been like 69. And I had a Stingray bicycle. And my house was, maybe a mile from the school. And in riding the bike, I remember the details of the sun, the crispness of the day, and just that forward motion. And when I was describing it to her, I broke down. I started crying, describing this bike ride to her. And parenthetically, I'll note, we didn't talk about this in part one, but my dad died when I was 14 of lung cancer. As I mentioned, he was a lawyer. It was really tough for me. Very, very, very tough. That grief, or should I say unresolved grief, 25 years later after the murder case, is the thing that then triggered me into finding my vocation and finding my calling. Because I volunteered in the palliative care unit of a big hospital for 5 years on Fridays, just visiting patients, dying patients. And that I did after that murder case that I described to you. And so that was really tough. And it's, the long arc of grief. I don't care how old you are. Your dad died in 2020. You know what I'm talking about. And even though he was 97 years old, doesn't matter. If you were in your 50s or if you were in your teens, grief is grief. A broken heart is a broken heart. Sorrow is sorrow. I don't care what age you are. I believe your soul is ageless. Your true self, your true nature has no age. And so my 9-year-old soul, or what my 9-year-old that I thought was, for whatever reason, I was evoking this freedom and this bike ride. And I couldn't figure out what it was. I don't know what it was. I'm not that athletic I wrestled in high school for a little bit, and I did martial arts in college when I lived in Japan, but then I kind of gave it up for debate and law school and all that stuff. And I walk a lot. That's pretty much what I do. And now I do push-ups and stuff, all that aside. But so then last week I started thinking, okay, I need to go back to the short film called Slow Mo about this neurologist who gave it all up because of a neurological condition that he had. He lived in San Diego. If you haven't seen the video, I strongly encourage you to Google Slow Mo. And it's Slow Mo, all one word. And this guy started inline skating on the boardwalk in San Diego. He's done it every day for 15 years. And in this documentary, he as a neurologist, he describes this position that he gets in that's almost like the Warrior 3 position in yoga. So it's one leg on the ground, inline skating, one leg and back, both arms out to his side, almost like he's flying, head down. But he's slow. It's fairly slow. Wow. It's not the super speed. And he describes it as reaching this place. Some would say the zone or flow state. I don't think it's that. Perhaps it is, but he talks about the science behind, the neuroscience behind acceleration, forward acceleration, and gravity, and the center of gravity in the earth sort of pulling down, and its effect on our brain and our equilibrium. And he says that maybe in skaters or skiers or surfers but what I was going to ask you, since I'm not super athletic right now, I haven't done skating or inline, but the reason I want to figure out what that is for me is because it takes you to a place. It's a meditative place. And I meditate a lot. I pray every morning, but I want to experience that in something that I can do physically that will bring me to that sort of maybe forward acceleration. Or what do you think about that?
Wow.
I know you're going to know about this. I know you're going to know about it.
That example is pretty bizarre. It's hard to relate to what the guy's talking about with his positioning of his body. But I think, life is so comfortable that we don't have many opportunities to push the body to the limit once in a while. And, I've been doing this my whole life, and it's just so rewarding that I think of it as second nature. But, I've had a transition in my athletic practices over my lifetime. And I used to be an endurance athlete, and that was my whole thing, was going all day and pushing my body and putting my brain into that state where it's like, we got to concentrate for a 7-hour bike ride. And that's all fine and dandy. But now, like, my complete passion is an event that takes 1 second. I'm a high jumper, and that's all I think about. It's so fun to get out there and try to perfect my technique. And from the time you leave the ground to landing in the pit, it's 1 second. You don't even know what's going on. I have to watch the video to see if my technique is right, because it happens too quickly. But I'm just referencing that as that's what my talking point is. Like, you go out there and do something that's so different from your day-to-day experience of typing a computer or laying in a bed or sitting in a chair. And it can be a real rush, in that sense that maybe that's what you're relating with the guy in the in the show.
Yeah.
And especially if
Yeah.
you're, not super competent at something, and now you pick up, everyone's into archery now, the cool people, or whatever it might be. But, I've been skiing my whole life, and my friend who's an expert skier, he gave me a little tip on the slopes last month. And I had, from the second he said it, the next 3 days, I felt like I owned the whole mountain. I had broken through from an entire lifetime of being scared to get out of control. And now I'm using my arms correctly. And you just have these kind of portals that are accessible in the physical realm that aren't there anywhere else that I've experienced. Maybe in a 3-day silent meditation retreat, you're going to feel the same way I did when I did that epic 8-hour bike ride and climbed up to the top of the mountain, because those things I can remember just like your 9-year-old bike ride to school.
Yeah, that's why I'm well, maybe should you have the time and you see that video, and you can email me back and tell me what you think or something. But I'm fascinated by this. I'm fascinated by because in that age of 9 years old, the knowing of freedom is more accessible than, like, I just turned 60 last week. And, for us 60-year-olds or 50 or whatever, we tend to get sort of separated from that knowing of freedom. And I don't necessarily mean, emotional freedom, or I mean the combined physical and spiritual freedom combined together. That's what I think is very interesting about it's a convergence. So yes, it's meditative, but it's kind of induced by a physical experience. And not one that was like my bike ride to school. I mean, it wasn't like I was breaking some speed record or something. It was just this experience of freedom and knowing. And it was just kind of strange how it came up in therapy. And then I happened to remember that this documentary I'd seen years ago, it's from 2013. You'll love it. It won all kinds of awards, this documentary, 16 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. Watch
16 minutes. Yeah. 16 minutes.
I'm also thinking of, I was, I graduated college. I was a big triathlete on the running team. And then I was immersed into work at the world's largest accounting firm. And it wasn't my calling, man. I could tell on day one when everyone was so excited, all the other hires were captivated by the employee orientation and the retirement plan. And I was like, what am I doing here wearing this stupid suit in this office building? And I only lasted there 11 and a half weeks. And the day I announced my retirement, they were pretty surprised because they'd spent all that money training me. But when I walked out of the building, and the next day I got on my bike and I rode 100 miles, which I wasn't prepared for. Wow. But my intention was I was going to go try to become an athlete now. But I think, combining that particular bike ride with the previous day I had exited a career and like walked out of this building and felt like I was really free to go live my life instead of to that point, I had majored in accounting and done the interview process and the recruiting and all these things that, society was telling me this is what you're supposed to do. You go to college, you get a degree, the degree applies to a career, everything was on point. And then, exiting the building and sitting on a bike seat instead, I think that's, that was sort of a transcendent experience too.
I'm sure it was. What a moment of freedom. I mean, truly, that's, that there's nothing like it really. And it's not that I'm saying that I want the feeling for the sake of the feeling, but I want to experience that kind of connectivity that is combined, as I said, sort of converging with a physical experience, because I have had I described to you, I've had that feeling in Africa, when we're there with I had that experience when I was volunteering with patients who were dying in the hospital. I've had that same kind of feeling of freedom as I'm just spending a moment, with this person in date. But I thought, when because I've read so much about you and your experience with sports and as an athlete, and that I thought maybe you would have also some thoughts on this. So
pretty wild. I love it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shawn.
Yeah, you bet.
Good
well,
stuff.
Let me know what you think about that.
Thank you for listening to the show. I love sharing the experience with you and greatly appreciate your support. Please email podcast@bradventures.com with feedback, suggestions, and questions for the Q&A shows. Subscribe to our email list at bradkearns.com for a weekly blast about the published episodes and a wonderful bi-monthly newsletter edition with informative articles and practical tips for all aspects of healthy living. You can also download several awesome free ebooks when you subscribe to the email list. And if you could go to the trouble to leave a 5 or 5-star review with Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen to the shows, that would be super incredibly awesome. It helps raise the profile of the B.rad podcast and attract new listeners. And did you know that you can share a show with a friend or loved one by just hitting a few buttons in your player and firing off a text message? My awesome podcast player called Overcast allows you to actually record a soundbite excerpt from the episode you're listening to and fire it off with a quick text message. Thank you so much for spreading the word. And remember, be rad.